us today. I'm really excited to introduce you to Michael Campbell and Don Gregory. And you may be wondering, if those of you who know that I'm in Somerset, and once you hear the voices of these guys, you realize they're not. So in 1997, I was taking an Amtrak across Northern America from Los Angeles to Boston on my way to moving over to England. And we stopped off in Montana, went in a little cafe to get a bite to eat. Next door was a tack shop. I had to go have a nose round. So I'm looking through stuff and I see this pot called Hoof-No. So I'm looking at it, and the gal who worked there said, I guess she caught sight of my cuticles. She said, "That's really good for cuticles." I said, "Really? It looks like it's for horses." She said, "Yeah, but it's really good for cuticles." So I bought this 1997. This is the new updated version, so I still have some of that. And now I've got in my little pot to carry in my purse. So now I've got my hoof alive. Well, fast forward to about 2000, probably 2012, I should think. I was introduced to Michael Campbell, talked on the phone over and over again. I had loads of clients and customers with horses that had health problems. So I'd always get Michael on phones. He knows everything about horses.
Yeah, not
Then,
quite.
well, I don't. Well, I eventually met him and Dawn in Phoenix, Arizona. They were doing one of their first horse stress management clinics. And then I found out who Don Gregory was, and I went, "Oh my gosh, Hoof Alive." So, and then now here we are, 2020. I get to interview them. So you can see why I'm so excited. So I'm going to turn over to Michael, and he is going to just introduce us to Dawn and some, I think, fascinating information about the world of horses.
Well, Don lives in northern Wyoming, and I lived all over the country, but my mother lived in Sheridan, Wyoming, which is 30 miles north of where Don lives. And so I eventually moved up there and opened a jewelry store. I've been a jeweler all my life, and that's how I got to know Don. And then he showed me Hoof Alive, and okay, he's got this Hoof Alive, and had it in my store because I had it. But I never really realized until we got on the road how great, how unbelievable it really was. But how we got to know each other, we got involved in a product, and we saw this horse called Zamora on the West Coast in Northern California. And we saw give it a supplement, and what happened to the horse, we couldn't believe it. We thought it was a phony. So Don got in the truck. He says, "I got some customers up there in Northern California I haven't seen for a long time, some store customers. I'll drive out there. I'm going to go see this horse." So we did that. And turned out it was a real story, and it was for real. And he came back, and then from then on, he has a lot of feed store customers all over the country, and so we started doing little presentations in some of the feed stores, and they were pretty successful. But I had gotten onto glyphosate at that point, and I had to keep my mouth shut because I couldn't be in a feed store and tell them their feed was all full of glyphosate. So so anyway, we did a lot of miles on the road, a lot of miles, and I learned about. I got to the point where I can almost pitch Hoof Alive as Don's got a lot more knowledge in horses and the actual problems with hooves than I do, but I understand his product as good as probably anybody in the country.
That's
And
correct.
there's a lot of great bullet points. And the one thing that always impressed me, there's always a couple words when you listen to somebody or listen to anything that grab you, that are important if you listen to a talk or anything. And right away, when I saw the word cohesion, that it increased cohesion by 300 to 400%, I'm like, man, what? It's the most important part of the horse, and you can increase that cohesion and have the moisture balance right and everything, and there isn't any other. I mean, I've looked at every single product there is in the world on hooves that you can find in this country, and there's nothing even close. I mean, it's just one of those products that's just far above them. And Don understands it, and he can deal with the people that have problems. And we've seen some miracles with horses. I mean, absolute miracles on hooves. And we've seen people that don't take care of them, and we've seen everything. But it's Don can. I'll tell you. I'll just give it to him, but he'll explain to you about Hoof Alive and coronet soaking. It's quite the thing. So go ahead, Don.
Well, Thank you, Mike. It's interesting that so many people that I have start talking about the hoof, and then I mentioned cohesion, and they don't know what cohesion is. So I used to use a little uh, draw three circles, and I would put a little bit of space between the circles, and I would tell them that now this is the represents the three, let's say three of the fibers of the hoof or the cells of the hoof, either one of the hoof wall. And before hoof alive, you have the space there. After you put hoof alive on and it goes in, the little circles are touching each other. In other words, the circles are small at first, and then they get big and they swell together because of their enlargement, and that's cohesion. It means that it's the attraction of like particles, and in some is even attraction of unlike particles. So when you put hoof alive on, all these little cells and fibers of the hoof swell together. And it works exactly the same on the fingernail. The reason it works on the fingernail is the exact same reason that it works on a horse, is because of it increases the cohesion, and it protects it against water saturation and evaporation. So when you put hoof alive on the hoof, suddenly you solve several problems beginning almost overnight. The cohesion goes up 200-300%. The more, over several days, it will increase probably up to 400-500% higher. What that means is now everybody that's ever seen a horse shod, horses, shod very much, they notice what's called nail cracks, nail splits. It's actually more of a split than a crack that's caused from stress, dryness, and what have you. So when you drive a nail, which the hooves simply help to hold the hoof together. But if the cohesion is too low, then you'll have what's called a nail split. So the very first time that this was ever used, which was back in 1985, I wrote an article called "The Hoof Live Story," and the gentleman originally asked me if I could make him some hoof live, because he asked me if there was anything good for cracked hooves. I said there is, Greg, but nobody makes it. He said, well, could you make me some? So that was a magical word, because I was ready at that point. I knew I had the formulation ready. I knew what to do. I just hadn't done it because I didn't really own horses. All I did was work on them all day long. So I said, yes, I can. I took him the first batch of Hoof Alive, and he started using it. And a week later, I he shod 7 of his horses reset, because he was president of the Wyoming Cutting Horse Association. And he was just one of the people that I did a lot of shoeing for. And so I showed up a week later, and he came bounding almost out of his house as I pulled up towards his house. And I knew there was something different about it. He had a spring in his step and a gleam in his eye. And I rolled my window down on my truck. I said, what's going on? He said, well, I don't know if you know it or not. You've really stumbled onto something here. And I think Pat has read the article on it that I wrote. So has Mike. But the long story short, I reset 7 of his cutting horses that day, the shoes, and he had set this whole thing up. And I got to the 7th horse, and he was standing over there watching. He wanted to see what would happen. And I started to pull the first shoe, and I looked at him. I said, what's the story on this horse? And he said, well, this is the only one that hasn't had any on. That horse, at the end, by the time I got all shoes on, had cracks in practically every nail hole. The other 6 horses didn't have one split. And that horse that didn't have it on, it took me longer to shoe, probably another 15 minutes. I had trouble driving all the nails, 2 or 3 of them bent as I was driving them in, just to show you the difference between the hardness of the hooves. The first 6 horses had wonderful, flexible, easy to work on hooves. And the other one was almost a nightmare because when you
Brittle.
go to trim the hoof, it shatters.
So Don, you were a farrier.
I was a farrier for
You were a farrier.
18 years professionally at that point, at that
And
time.
you saw a need. You saw a need and you just sort of stayed with it. And
Yes,
you
I
need,
didn't know. I saw the first, yes, I first saw the need, but I didn't let it go. And it took me 18 years to reach the point where I knew what to do. That I knew there was something wrong with what people were using on hooves, like substances like pine tar, turpentine, phenol, petroleum. And they're caustic. You wouldn't dare put those on your fingernails. You certainly wouldn't put them on your lips like they do Hoof Alive.
well, they put them
And
in
so
personal care products for people because I've researched that extensively. So
lanolin is a natural substance. You know, if you want to say God made lanolin, okay, I'd go with that. It's a natural, God made substance in this world. It's not man made. It's from wool, and so you know it's comes from wool. So what they extract it, and I use that as the base of Hoof Alive. So you have a natural substance that comes from a natural, you know, uh, thing like wool, little filaments and fibers, and it goes into the fibers of the hoof. It goes into the fibers of your hair, goes into the fibers of your fingernail, and it's completely non-toxic, non-caustic, non-irritating. It's harmless. You can put it right on a bleeding cut and whatever, a saddle sore, rope burn, bite, a brand, anything. And it helps it immediately to soothe whatever it is that you put it on. So it's a vast subject, really. But as a graduate farrier, I was a corrective farrier. I was taught by a master farrier, Al Pinson, 1968, Grapevine, Texas, North Texas Horseshoeing Institute. And when I graduated, he had shown me everything, shown us pretty much everything that we needed to do. I knew that I knew, and at some point, that really is. You think that's a open door. Sometimes it's a closed door. Once you think you know it all. So, but thank God I kept my mind open to keep learning, and I loved horses. And but I had to realize that I needed to, that there were things that needed to be changed. And
well,
so
the one thing that Don understood real quick was about, the coronet, and that if you took care of that coronet, you could accelerate the growth of a hoof. And that's really something when that thing is right, and it'll you have a real bad hoof, and you're trying, and maybe you'll have a quarter crack or something, and you're trying to get that hoof back. He figured out that you could accelerate the growth of that hoof if you took care of that.
Do a quick little promo here. This is the cornet soaking kit. It comes with two of these cornet soakers, I call them. I basically developed this the very first year that I brought out Hoof Alive. And so this has been with it. And this is kind of a, fold out version. It has Velcro and it's adjustable. So it goes around the hoof, and it can make, it can totally renew the cornet. But you have to vet wrap it. And it's shown, I have instructions on the back of this card that shows complete this little kit, it's called. And it's inexpensive, and you can even reuse it time and time again.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, so that's good.
It has a plastic bag, so you can, when you get done with it, you can store it in the plastic bag. But the other thing I want to tell everybody, I want to just tell that everybody that owns a horse, and you love your horse, you want to take the best care of his hooves. To do that, number one, you need to get get Hoof-Live. These are the two horse sizes here, pint and a 4-ounce. You can get one or both of those, and you need to also get a hoof stand so you can get over your aversion to touching that smelly, stinky hoof, and because they do smell bad because of where we make these horses stand. It's not their fault they have to stand in there. Trust me, if they had their choice, they would not be in that stall. They would be out walking around, whatever. So, so their feet do smell. That's not their fault. We have to get over the idea, our aversion to touching those stinky hoofs. We got to clean them out. We got to get them up on that hoof stand. And there's the cheapest way to buy a to make your own hoof stand is to go to something like Home Depot and get what they call a tamping bar. And they usually they're about 5 feet tall. You need to cut it down to 18 inches usually. It's a good height. And then you can I put a little pipe cap on the top of it to kind of and you can set the hoof on there, and the horse will gladly put his hoof on there. There's videos on how to do that on the internet, on soaking the cornet.
Okay, another thing I love about Hoof-Alive is the one time Don had a guy over at Jackson Hole that had a 6-horse hitch, and I don't know what kind of horses they were. I guess they were, but they were all draft horses. Anyway, he was a competitor and he competed with those horses, and so he was at this big meeting, and I guess he won it. And the guy said, "Man, what do you do to those hoofs? They're polished. I mean, you must really polish those hoofs. Or what are you putting on them?" He says, "I just use Hoof-Alive. If you use it steady over a year, you'll look like you've got polished hooves. It's amazing."
Oh, I want to show everybody I've got a little hoof, that sawed-off hoof. Oh, here it is. Wait a minute. Well, let's just show you this picture here of a before and after. Can you see that?
Now raise it up a little bit higher. Yeah.
Okay, so now this hoof here is pretty drastic. Most hooves don't look like that, although I have seen them. And then this is, you want to end up with something that looks like that, but it doesn't happen overnight. But here's my shelf talker. Is that in a good position?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so the one with the two different products, Brand X, the lady used to call them, we call it now Brand X. It's a water-based product, and she used to use this. I didn't take these pictures. One of my customers and actually one of my stores, my dealers, took that, and she wanted to see the actual difference. She led the horse up. She put a coat of Brand X on one foot, a coat of Hoof-Alive on the other, and then she took a week later. She went and brought the same horse and stood it in the same spot and took that picture. It's a before and after, you might say, and that's just one treatment. And it would even look better than that if she had done like at least 2 treatments first week, which is what we recommend. So that's the difference. Go ahead.
What sort of preventive measures would that offer?
Okay.
Probably a range.
As far as what do you mean, rain or
dryness? Just preventing the cracks and the splits, like you said. But I'm just thinking of, the horse's hoof is fairly complicated.
Well, okay, it's the hoof wall itself is a bunch of fibers, and so the hoof wall, once you get the cohesion starting up, it's immediately, you will not have a nail split, for instance, after the first week when you're shoeing that horse. The horse will not. Any old crack and old splits, whatever, they'll swell shut.
And what about?
Remember the three circles when they.
What about in conjunction with laminitis? I've heard that's used to treat a horse with laminitis. Okay,
that's a wonderful thing. Now, laminitis, what Mike touched on earlier, the gal that in Northern California that had that Arab horse called Zamora had horrible laminitis. she could barely walk. They had a whole video. We need to send everybody that link so you can watch that video. It changed in 3 days. It didn't really have anything to do with Hoof Alive. It's a blood problem. Anything in the horse's system, like for instance, gentleman in Florida, in Ocala, Florida, had this high-end mare that her colts sell every year at the Keeneland sale for over $100,000. She retained a placenta, which affected her blood, and she almost immediately, within a few days, started going. She was going to go into a full-blown founder. And a founder is, it's the blood clots. What is it? Clots up inside, and the circulation pretty much almost slows way down anyway. It may not stop, but it slows way down, and it can cause a tremendous pressure on top of the third phalanx. The coffin bone is another common name for it. And it starts rotating that bone downward and can literally push it down almost sometimes through the bottom of the hoof. And that hoof, the horse, of course, is at that point lame. And so this gentleman had been, they sell this product called Protein, and which is what the lady in Northern California, to connect the dots, had given to Zamora, and it changed her in about 3 days. She went from a horse that could barely walk, and their husband opened the gate of the pen that she was in about 100 yards from the barn. She literally ran with her tail, like Arabs do, streaming out behind her and her head up, and she would nickered about 4 times, running full speed towards.
Oh, we lost.
So that was an eye-opener for me. I couldn't believe it. And so I drove to California to see that horse. And sure enough, that the product had reduced the inflammation in the blood. It was a natural product. It's actually made for people, but it works on horses. It works on dogs. And so inflammation, laminitis, is a result of inflammation of the blood. And it starts inflaming the lamina. That's where the end of itis, laminitis, inflammation, comes from. And the poor lamina begin to separate. They're inflamed, and they get the blood begins to congeal inside, and you begin to see the effects of that as a farrier. People can cause laminitis easily you go mow a big yard, dump all the grass every week or whenever you do it, into their pen, let them gorge themselves, or just give them all the feed that they can possibly eat, and you will probably cause your horse to either get laminitis or founder.
So quite a few causes for that then.
Yes, there are. Any abnormal thing in the body of the horse will eventually almost immediately go to his hooves.
So it's almost a good diagnostic tool, but it's symptomatic of something else wrong in the horse.
Well, it's even different now than it used to be a little bit because of glyphosate. If a horse is getting glyphosate or feed with glyphosate, or any way it's getting in glyphosate into its blood, it weakens the laminin, which actually holds the cells together in the end of all the capillaries. And so those capillaries are weaker if that horse has got glyphosate in his system than they were. And we tested horses' hoofs at the racetrack, and the hoofs had real high counts of glyphosate in them. So we know it weakens them. So it's even worse now than it once was, like 30 or 40 years ago.
Well, fascinating. Should we open to questions?
Questions now or not?
I think that's
Does anyone have a question?
Great time. Any questions?
So I have a question. Here in the UK, a lot of people are using rubber matting in their stables and then putting the bedding on top of that. And I heard somewhere that having a horse standing on concrete is preferable to them being on the rubber matting. So does that go back to what you were saying about the guy that was deep littering his stable with all the layers of the bedding, that because it's not getting contact with the ground, it's not feeding the frog? So do you think that rubber matting's a good thing or not a good thing?
I think it's a good thing. If you're asking me, I would say it's a good thing. It's not either here nor there as far as comparing it to concrete. I would say maybe, you know, anything you can do to increase the contact of the frog with the ground is good. So, you know, the horse does need to be let out of the stall as often as possible so it can get out there and get that frog pumping. Now, there's an old saying: a horse has 5 hearts. A heart, and then 4 frogs. These amazing things, they pump blood. And a horse, when he brings his hoof to the ground, and the frog makes contact with the earth, well, it spreads that pressure goes up to the collateral cartilages that then spread the heels. And the heels, when your horse steps down, the heels spread. When the horse lifts his hoof back up, it contracts. There's a pumping action. Think of this: when the hoof goes down, the heels spread. The hoof comes up. The heels come together. As long as they're not contracted too much, there's your problem. So you want a good big frog. You want to keep those heels, you know, the spreading every time he steps down and so forth. So that's pumping that blood, vital for a healthy hoof.
Well, I'm fortunate because my horses are out more often than they're not. So at the moment they've been out 24/7, but they're due to come back in again on Saturday, tomorrow. So, but they get turned out at you know, very early in the morning, and then they're usually not coming back in again till 9 o'clock at night. So they're more often than not out at least 12 hours in a day. So, and they're not shod either. So, so I'm fortunate that they have pretty good feet.
That's good. The tandem that I mentioned, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there. If I had a high-end horse or a low-end horse, wouldn't matter. I would be giving that horse occasionally some protection, the blood from inflaming, because it will actually take. There's a video called Cassie the Tandem Dog, and it changed that dog's entire life in about just a few days.
Yeah, it
works fast and it's cheap comparatively. I think it's comparatively cheap, but it's wonderful for people as well. But it helps in lots of ways. It gets rid of free radicals in the blood.
Well, I've got both my horses on it. So
oh, you do.
I do.
Well, it's the health of the mitochondria that matters. It's the in and the out of energy, and you know, and keeping that clean and that fuel going through there on a you know, when you slow that down, I mean, you slow everything down. So I mean, it's just a great help in keeping the mitochondria going like it's supposed to go.
Well, let's see if Carla has a question. Oh, Carla's, let me unmute you. Carla's joining us from Minnesota. Is that right?
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Oh,
she just hung herself up. She'll be right back.
Should
So
we go into what live cost, or here in the United States, these are selling between $40 and $50. The thing you need to know about Hoof-Alive is it's extremely concentrated. We don't add any water, any petroleum, no fillers whatsoever. So it's by far the most concentrated product on the market. So it's worth every penny. And if it wasn't worth every penny, we would have been out of business probably 25 years ago.
So do you
So the
have
same
to
people,
do you have to soak the coronary band or through your thingy, or can you apply it by with your fingers? Does it have to be soaked, or can you just apply
no,
it
it
to the
doesn't have to
coronary
be
band?
so. No, this is primarily for competitive horses,
Oh, okay.
competition, jumpers, runners, whatever. But it releases all the stress completely, goes entirely into all of the growth, what I call the pre-hoof, the little infantile baby lamina at the cornet. It gives that cornet the royal treatment, if I could use that English term. And you're protecting and pampering the most important part of the hoof, which is the cornet. Everything grows from there.
Hmm.
And you just have to do it usually once a month, but you will have completely stress-free hooves if you use this once a month, or if you use Hoof Alive, usually usually once or twice a week, no less. So stress is important to keep out of that hoof, right, Mike?
For absolutely.
Carla's back.
Yep. Can you hear me?
We can. Don't touch anything.
Okay. So I have a question. So I keep my horses in training on 2 a day. Do you think the horses on 1 a day are benefiting somewhat?
Absolutely. You don't
Yeah.
even need that much. You don't even need that much. Mike came up with this analogy. We used to batter back and forth and compare notes about this. Laura, if you've seen that video,
Mhm.
she put that horse on just a portion of one pill. I think she said is all she had left. And we were wondering how a portion of one pill could be that
Mhm.
powerful. And Mike came up with the idea that it wakes up their system. Because the system of a horse is ready for, because he's a vegetarian. He does not eat meat. He's ready to respond to them.
Mhm.
And so
Okay.
sometimes, even in medicine, they have this thing called homeopathy. And, I think that's the correct
That's
diet.
correct.
I'm saying is just a small portion of something has
Mhm.
dramatic effect. But of
Okay,
course, you're
that's good.
doing that all along and everything. I'm not trying to discourage you from using it but it's a fantastic way to prevent laminitis. And if you prevent laminitis in a hoof, you've really done a lot.
Yeah.
Or in a horse,
And then I have a question on as far as the amino acids. Do you think feeding, what benefits do you see in feeding amino acids, like a powder form for the hoof?
I'll let Mike talk that. I'll let Mike answer that.
Yeah. I think there's some benefit. I mean, the thing is, if you're feeding them anything with glyphosate in them, you're messing up the amino chain completely. I mean, it takes out gly in glyphosate is glycine, and glycine imitates the actual amino acid, and it's like taking out 4 or 5, like taking out 4 letters out of the alphabet. I mean, you change the pathway. And so, I mean, if your horse is really healthy, I don't think you gain much. If they're getting all the, if they got really good feed and hay, you're probably okay. But a little strengthening of it certainly isn't gonna. But boy, I'll tell you what, if there's glyphosate in any of that feed, it changes the amino chain unbelievably. So
Yeah.
then it's really important. So. And there's very little feed. It's really hard. If you're feeding an outside feed, it's hard to find an outside feed without glyphosate in it. I'll tell you, it's really tough. There isn't very much.
Yes, I do have a horse who has allergies to many things, and she needs on an alfalfa-based feed.
Yeah.
So I feed her pellets. I've found would that be non-glyphosate as
Well, if
well?
we find, yeah, if it's non-GMO, it's not genetic. I mean, most alfalfa is Roundup ready. I mean, if it's non-GMO, it means it's regular alfalfa. It's not Roundup ready. It should be good.
That should be good, because that's what she's on. So do you think like the farms around here in northern Minnesota are using glyphosate in their fields? Is it possible to get good alfalfa?
Well, if they're honest with you, they'll tell you if they are, or if they're doing, there's Roundup ready alfalfa. I would say 50% of the alfalfa or more in this country is Roundup ready. So you just about have to go find out, ask them. I mean, I spent a lot of time on the racetrack in Ruidoso. I was down there for almost a month, and those guys were feeding alfalfa, and their horses, they have this thing that they call tying up with alfalfa. And we found out if we took them off of that glyphosate alfalfa and the feed and got them on good feed, it brought them around. Horses respond almost overnight. It brought them around immediately. And they were good. I mean, sometimes when they tie up like that, it would take those guys 14 days to a month to get them back to where they could really even exercise them hardly. We had them back in 72 hours by just pulling them off the glyphosate. It was amazing. So they're sensitive. I mean, they're really sensitive. So it's important to find the right feed. It's really important. In my opinion.
Can I do a little bit of to see? Can everybody see this?
Well, we can't read it, but we can see it.
Okay. Well, it's the cornet soaking. Let me just read it. These bullet points. It says cornet soaking with Hoof-No. It's simple. It's easy. You can do this. Here's what you can achieve. Renew and restore the infantile corium growth. Release all hoof stress in 24 to 48 hours. Establish true moisture balance. Swell most existing cracks shut. Increase cohesion 300 to 400%. Heal separations at their source, which of course is at the cornet. Show excess, again, slow excess evaporation. Stop and prevent all new cracks. Accelerate healthy new growth and maximize circulation and heel expansion. And then finally, weatherproof the hoof naturally. All of those things can be done with Hoof Alive, especially if you soak the cornet, if you need to soak it. You don't have to soak it, but it helps.
So we could send that as a PDF to anyone who would like that information.
Oh, yeah.
We can.
Any
I have
more questions?
Please ask us some questions. Stump us.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So basically you're saying that hoof problems the hooves are very sensitive and they can be affected by outside influences like standing in manure type, and they can also by shock or vaccines, perhaps, all sorts of things. So basically it's really hard to keep a hoof to be healthy. Really sounds like everything seems to affect it.
Well go ahead, Don.
It's not that hard. It's that people think it's that hard. It can be done. All you got to know is the hoof is alive. You have to treat it not with kid gloves. You just have to treat it with intelligence and use all natural, Hoof Alive. And also, if you use a natural product to keep the inflammation in the blood down, those are the two main things. And then, of course, natural, just necessary hoof care. Okay.
And can you get Hoof Alive in the UK?
Unfortunately, at this point, no.
Not
we
yet.
We want to fix that.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. Yeah. Okay. I'll look forward to that.
So if we all do a run on Mole Valley Do you have Hoof Alive? Do you have Hoof Live? Hoof Live yet?
Okay, we'll do.
I think that's the best
Thing
bet.
about hooves, the thing about hooves are like everything, and it's called maintenance. You know, if you do it all the time, even if you know, monthly, weekly, better weekly a little bit, but if you just do a little bit, 5 minutes at a time here, you know, pretty regularly, you probably aren't going to have very many hoof problems. The hoof problems are a lot more predominant in of course, of stabled horses than horses that are turned out.
Yeah.
But you know, as long as you keep track and you kind of keep maintenance, you don't have that many hoof problems, unless they do get a little bit of laminitis, and just a little bit of laminitis, it's say, oh, well, he ate a little bit too much grain. A lot of times that little bit too much grain, you'll see a ring around that hoof from that too much grain. And, you know, and that affected that horse. And what it does, it affects is what holds that hoof wall to the inside, to the hoof, you know, those lamini get weakened. That hoof capsule, and when you weaken that hoof capsule a little bit, you weaken that horse a tiny bit, and even if it's just a little bit, you know. So
prevention is better than cure, like with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
Let me add a real little bit of a story here, 2 stories. I was in Phoenix, Arizona. I was shoeing horses, and at one point, and because I've been in, you know, quite a few states. And there was a lady, and I just had to trim her horses inside their stalls. And they had fairly good sized stalls. And I noticed all the carrots on the ground. And I noticed as I trimmed her horses, they all kind of had a little bit of bloodshot evidence on the bottom of their soles as I was trimming. And I said, what are all these carrots about? She says, well, the people at what they call the sheds there by the railroad track, they give us their seconds and we give them to our horses. She was literally causing laminitis in all of her horses by giving them too many carrots. An occasional carrot doesn't hurt anything. Then now another lady here in Wyoming I noticed the same thing on her horses. She had a bunch of cutting horses, high-end cutting horses. And I noticed the blood evidence as I was trimming and shoeing her horses. And I said, I looked over next to her big barn, and here was an apple orchard. And I said, somehow it came to light that she was giving apples to those horses, kind of probably quite a few. She was literally causing inflammation, laminitis in her own horses with love. The same thing, of course, can happen if the guy that mows his yard and puts all that lush green grass over it and lets the horse just gorge himself. Their diets are crucial. You've got to keep the diets from changing too much. Once you get a good, normal, balanced diet, don't go giving your horse a bunch of apples or carrots or anything else, green grass, high starchy feeds or anything. You're upsetting the natural balance in his system, and that'll affect his feet 100% of the time.
That's amazing.
And it's quick. I mean, horses have really big, fast systems. So anything you do to them, I mean, you know, you give them a vaccination or anything. I've seen them after they give them 2 or 3 vaccinations, man, they're loggy for 2 or 3 days, and they're loggy immediately because it's in their blood, it's in their system, it goes in there fast, boy. And anything they do, anything you give a horse, it's in his system like now, like in seconds. And so it affects him quickly. It gets to that mitochondria real quick and slows him down. So, you know, that's the one thing you have to know about horses.
So if it's caught in time, they recover quickly then.
Oh, they'll recover quick. Boy, I'll tell you, if you give them the right thing, you can bring them out of a really bad situation really quick. Yeah, for sure. Even if they're you know, pretty inflamed or whatever, if you give them exactly the right thing, boy, they'll snap right out of it. That's for sure.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. We've gone 40 of our 30 minutes.
Okay, good.
So, well, maybe we'll come back for another session. You know, if you have any topics you'd like to have covered, just private message me and we can ask Michael and Dawn if they'd like to address that, or if you have any, friends or associates that have issues they would like them to cover.
You might be
we
able to
can-
talk about teeth and floating their teeth. One of the most neglected things with horses is floating their teeth, keeping their teeth right, because they need to have level, good teeth. And there are not very many people that know how to do it right. And so it's hard to find somebody, number one, but they really need their teeth floated. So just. that's
I've
a
heard
little-
some horrible stories, just
Yeah.
in me, and I'm not a horse owner, and I've heard some horrible stories about horses' teeth and the problems they
Yeah.
cause. I think Stella probably has as well.
A
So,
bad tooth can kill a horse in 72 hours.
wow.
I've seen it happen because the poison in that tooth is so dramatic, so quick, I mean, it's important that those teeth are really important in a horse. I just brought that up because I think it's so neglected and people should think about it a little bit.
Okay, well, let's think about that. Well, I'm gonna end the recording now. And
Goodbye, everybody.